The graduation they called a failure. 4 years before my mother asked me for $300,000, she called my college graduation a catch-up ceremony for someone who spent too long figuring out her life. She did not attend. My father did not attend. My younger sister did not attend. While I crossed the stage in Raleigh with my grandmother screaming my name from the third row, my family was 2 states away drinking champagne at my sister's engagement brunch and posting photographs under the caption, "Celebrating the daughter who always makes us proud." I was 29 years old, graduating after working full-time for nearly a decade, because the same parents smiling in those photographs had stopped paying for anything connected to me when I was 8. 4 years later, I sold the healthcare company I had built for enough money that newspapers suddenly remembered how to spell my name. 48 hours after the article appeared, my mother posted a childhood photograph of me on Facebook and wrote, "We always knew our Jocelyn would do extraordinary things." I stared at those words for almost a minute because the woman claiming my success had once told relatives I was too difficult to raise. Then she called me sweetheart for the first time I could remember and invited me home for Thanksgiving. She said the family wanted to heal. She forgot to mention that she had already told my sister's wedding planner I would cover the remaining $85,000. She forgot to mention the overdue mortgage on their Richmond house. And she definitely forgot that 3 weeks earlier, while cleaning out my grandmother's bedroom after her funeral, I had found a bundle of letters explaining why I had really been sent away at 8 years old. By Thanksgiving night, my sister would learn that our parents had lied to both of us for 25 years. My father would finally admit why he let one daughter disappear, so he could keep his marriage intact. And my mother would discover that becoming useful to her family was not the same thing as becoming welcome in it again. My name is Jocelyn Hart. I was 33 when this happened, and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. If you met me now, you would probably describe my life as stable. I own a comfortable townhouse with too many plants, drive a practical Volvo I bought after my old Honda finally gave up at 212,000 miles, and work as a product strategist for the healthcare company that acquired my startup. My kitchen has a drawer dedicated entirely to tea because my grandmother believed every emotional problem was improved by boiling water. I have friends who know where the spare key is. I have a therapist who has spent 3 years teaching me that "I don't need anything" is not a personality. And I have an ex-boyfriend who once told me I could turn abandonment into a project plan faster than anyone he had ever met. He was trying to be funny. He was also right. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, in a family that cared deeply about appearing close. My parents, Graham and Celeste Hart, owned an upscale kitchen and bath showroom called Hart and Home. They did well enough that we lived in a renovated colonial in a neighborhood where Christmas decorations seemed to require architectural review. My mother designed kitchens for people who used words like timeless and curated. My father managed installations and contractor relationships. Their business was respectable, their house was beautiful, their friendships were useful, and every family photograph looked as if someone had spent 15 minutes arranging our shoulders. There were 2 daughters in those photographs at first. Me and my younger sister, Avery. Avery was 3 years younger, blonde where I was dark-haired, round-faced where I had my father's narrow jaw and deep-set brown eyes. She was naturally affectionate, naturally pretty, and naturally good at making my mother happy. I do not blame her for that. Children learn quickly which version of themselves keeps adults warm. Avery learned that being charming worked. I learned that being low maintenance prevented criticism. The difference between how our mother treated us appeared in small places first. Avery forgot her ballet bag. Mom drove it across town. I forgot a permission slip. I missed the field trip because consequences built responsibility. Avery cried when Mom raised her voice. Mom apologized. I cried. Mom told me tears did not improve my argument. When Avery wanted piano lessons, we rearranged Tuesday evenings. When I asked for art classes, Mom said hobbies should fit around the family, not the other way around. Dad noticed some of it. I know that now. At the time, I believed he did not. He was kinder than Mom, but passive, in a way that looked gentle until you needed protection. He would slip me $10 after an argument, take me for ice cream, or tell me privately that my mother didn't mean things the way they sounded. What he almost never did was challenge her while she was actually hurting me. That distinction took me years to understand. My maternal grandmother, Ruth Bell, lived outside Asheville, North Carolina. She was the one adult in my childhood who seemed to recognize that something was wrong without asking me to prove it. Grandma Ruth was a retired public librarian with white hair she cut herself and a house full of books arranged by a system nobody else could understand. She came to school concerts. She mailed me sketchbooks. When my mother called me dramatic, Grandma would ask what happened before I became upset. That question alone made her feel dangerous to my parents. The event that changed my life happened when I was 8. I did not understand it fully until 25 years later. What I remembered was this. A man named Daniel Wren came to our house twice during one summer. My mother said he was an old friend from design school. He had curly blonde hair, laughed loudly, and brought Avery a stuffed rabbit even though he barely spoke to me. The second time he visited, my parents argued after he left. I woke up thirsty and heard them in the kitchen. Dad said, "You promised he was out of our lives." Mom said something I could not hear. Then Dad said, very clearly, "Every time I look at Jocelyn, I remember I stayed. Every time you look at Avery, you remember why." I did not know what that meant. The next morning at breakfast, I asked the question children ask when they sense adults hiding something. "Why does Avery look like Mr. Wren?" My mother dropped her coffee cup. It did not break, but coffee spilled across the table. Dad went completely still. I remember Avery eating cereal and looking between everyone because she had no idea why the room changed. Mom asked where I had heard that. I said nowhere. I said I had noticed. That afternoon, Grandma Ruth arrived unexpectedly. 2 days later, my mother packed a suitcase for me. "You're going to stay with Grandma for the school year," she said. I cried because I thought I was being punished. Dad told me it would be good for me to have space. Mom said Grandma's school district had better programs for a child who needs more individual attention. I asked whether Avery was coming. Mom said Avery was happy where she was. I asked what I had done. She said, "Not everything is about what you did, Jocelyn. Sometimes families make decisions for everyone's good." I waited for Dad to say I was coming back soon. He kissed my forehead and said, "Be good for Grandma." I left Richmond with one suitcase and a stuffed bear I was already embarrassed to still own. One school year became 2, then 3. My parents visited at Christmas the first year. They stayed less than 24 hours. Avery received a bicycle that Christmas. I received a bookstore gift card and a sweater Mom said would make me look less severe. By the time I was 12, nobody spoke about when I would move home. Grandma stopped calling the arrangement temporary because she saw what the word did to me. She converted the sewing room into a real bedroom. She let me choose dark blue paint, even though Mom said it made the room gloomy. She put a small desk beneath the window because I liked to draw. I stopped asking when my parents were taking me back, because there are only so many times a child can volunteer for rejection before self-respect begins disguising itself as indifference. My parents never abandoned me completely enough for outsiders to call it abandonment. That would have been easier to explain. They sent birthday cards. Dad called most Sundays for about 12 minutes. Mom occasionally mailed clothes she thought I needed. I spent some holidays in Richmond, where my old bedroom had gradually become a guest room, and then Avery's study. Family photographs on the staircase changed year by year. At 10, I still appeared in some. At 14, fewer. At 16, the newest professional family portrait showed Mom, Dad, and Avery in front of the fireplace. When I asked why nobody told me about the photography session, Mom said scheduling everyone was impossible. "You live in North Carolina now," she said, as though that had been a decision I made at 8. Avery grew up in the center of the home I had been removed from. She attended private school, then Virginia Commonwealth University. Mom organized graduation photographs months in advance. Dad surprised her with a used Jeep. I watched through social media because by then my visits had become uncomfortable enough that I stopped going unless Grandma encouraged me. Avery and I were not enemies. We simply had no opportunity to become real sisters. She believed I preferred grandma. I believed she did not care that I was gone. Both ideas had been encouraged because they made our parents' choices easier to live with. At 17, I asked Dad once why I never moved home. He said, "Your mother and you clash. Ruth gave you stability. Wasn't that your job?" He looked away. We did what seemed best at the time. That sentence became the family password. Anything painful could disappear behind it. Grandma never poisoned me against them. She did something better. She gave me options. When college application time came, she sat beside me at the kitchen table with scholarship forms and said, "Build a future. Nobody can threaten to take away when they're disappointed in you." I did not get enough aid to attend the university I wanted right away. So I worked. Community college first, then a transfer to North Carolina State. I studied information systems while working 30 hours a week at a medical billing office. I took semesters off when money ran short. Mom treated the delay like evidence that I lacked direction. Avery graduated at 22 and immediately joined Heart and Home as marketing director. Mom posted, "So proud of our girl for stepping into the family legacy." When I was 24, I told my parents I had finally transferred into a 4-year program. Dad said congratulations. Mom asked how long it would take me to finish this time. Grandma took me to dinner. The work that eventually changed my life began because the medical billing office where I worked was terrible at helping patients understand what happened after hospital discharge. Older patients missed home health appointments because one system did not talk to another. Families wrote dates on paper. Nurses called people who thought someone else had already scheduled them. I kept thinking there had to be a simpler way. For a senior project, I built a crude digital dashboard that coordinated follow-up visits, transportation reminders, and caregiver notes. A professor encouraged me to develop it. I did, slowly, after work, using free software and borrowed advice. By 29, I was finally finishing my degree and had 3 small clinics testing the platform. Graduation mattered to me not because I thought a diploma proved my worth, but because every semester represented rent paid, nights worked, rejection survived, and one more decision my parents had not made for me. I sent them invitations anyway. That part still embarrasses me slightly. No matter how independent people become, some younger version of us keeps checking whether the door might finally open. Dad texted, "We'll see what we can do." Avery sent a heart. Mom called a week later. Avery's boyfriend, Mason, had planned a surprise engagement brunch in Richmond the same afternoon as my commencement. His parents were flying in. Photographers had been booked. Mom told me the conflict in the voice of someone explaining weather. "Obviously we need to be here. My graduation date has been on your calendar for 4 months. Jocelyn, you're 29. I waited. What does that mean? It means we are not talking about a 22-year-old graduating with her class. You took a different path. That's fine. But I'm not going to pretend this is some extraordinary family milestone. I worked for this. Everyone works. So you're not coming," she sighed. "Please do not make Avery feel guilty on one of the happiest days of her life." I laughed because I genuinely could not believe she had turned my graduation into an attack on Avery. "I haven't even spoken to Avery." "Good, keep it that way." Then she said the line I still remember exactly. "I am not missing your sister's engagement for a catch-up ceremony, because you finally finished something most people finish years earlier." My body went cold. A catch-up ceremony. You know what I mean? "Yes," I said. "I finally do." Dad called the next day. He said Mom had been too harsh, but Avery's engagement could not be rescheduled. He offered to visit the following weekend. I told him not to. He came anyway, left flowers with Grandma, and returned to Richmond before I got home from work. On graduation day, Grandma Ruth wore a pale blue suit she had owned since 1998. She stood when my name was called and yelled, "That's my girl," loud enough that 3 families around her laughed. I cried while crossing the stage. Not because my parents were absent, because she was not. Later, at lunch, she gave me a fountain pen engraved with one word, "Finished." "Not because education is finished," she said, because waiting for them should be. That afternoon, Mom posted 23 photographs from Avery's engagement brunch. Roses, champagne, Mason on one knee, Dad hugging them. One photograph showed a chalkboard sign reading "Our whole family is here." I saved that screenshot. Then I blocked my mother. I did not block Dad immediately. He made the decision for me 6 months later when he asked whether I could let this graduation thing go, because it was making holidays difficult. I said holidays had been difficult for me since I was 8. He replied, "You always go too far back." I blocked him too. For the next 4 years, I built a life without asking whether they approved. The platform became a company called Lantern Care. I did not build it alone. That mythology annoys me. I had a brilliant software engineer named Priya, a nurse advisor named Carmen, 2 early investors who took a risk, and Grandma Ruth, who let me turn her dining room into an office whenever my apartment internet failed. We built software that helped hospital systems coordinate home recovery for older adults. It was boring to explain at parties and incredibly useful to the people who needed it. We grew from 3 clinics to 11 hospitals. Then a regional insurer offered a partnership. 18 months later, a larger healthcare technology firm made an acquisition offer. My personal proceeds after taxes and obligations were a little over $7 million. Enough to change my life. Not enough to change who had loved me before the number existed. I bought Grandma a new furnace. She complained that the old one had at least one winter left in her. I told her she could stubborn the furnace from a warm house. I paid off the remaining mortgage on her little place outside Asheville. She cried and then became furious because she said I was wasting good money on an old woman. "You spent half your life on me," I told her. "I'm buying you a roof without a payment." She said, "That's different." Every family apparently has that phrase too. Grandma died 3 weeks before the acquisition became public. A stroke. Fast. Unexpected. Merciful. In the way sudden loss is only merciful to the person who does not have to live afterward. I was with her in the hospital when she died. I spent the next week moving through grief like someone underwater. Her house became mine because she had left it to me years earlier. I stayed there after the funeral because I was not ready to return to Raleigh. One rainy afternoon, I began clearing her bedroom closet. Beneath quilts in an old cedar chest, I found a packet with my name written across it. What were letters? Some from my mother, most from my father. They dated back 25 years. The first one was written to Grandma Ruth shortly after I moved in. Dad wrote, "Celeste cannot handle Jocelyn being in the house right now. Every question she asks about Daniel sends her into panic. Avery is innocent and deserves protection from all of this. I know sending Jocelyn away is unfair, but I am trying to keep this marriage together." I read that paragraph 6 times. Another letter from Grandma replied, "You are protecting your marriage by making your oldest child pay for a betrayal she did not commit." Dad's next letter said, "I know. I tell myself it is temporary." 3 months later. Celeste says Jocelyn's face feels like accusation because she looks so much like me. She is calmer with only Avery here. A year later, Grandma wrote, "The child asks when she is going home. I will stop answering for you." Dad replied, "I don't know how to undo this without blowing up everything." Then there was a letter written when I was 15. Grandma had apparently threatened to tell me the truth. Dad begged her not to. Jocelyn already believes she was sent away because she is difficult. As terrible as that is, finding out Avery is Daniel's daughter and that Celeste could not bear Jocelyn's questions will destroy whatever relationship remains. I sat on Grandma's bedroom floor and understood my childhood in a completely new way. Avery was not my father's biological daughter. My mother had been involved with Daniel Wren. Dad knew. He stayed. And when 8-year-old me noticed enough to make the lie uncomfortable, the adults solved their marriage by removing the child asking questions. I did not know whether Avery knew. Nothing in the letters suggested she did. I cried until my face hurt. Then I found Grandma's final note. "Jocelyn, if you are reading this, I am gone, and your parents have probably discovered that success makes them sentimental. Do not use this truth to punish Avery. She was a child inside the same lie. But if your parents ask you to carry this family again, make Graham tell the truth in his own voice. You have carried enough explanations for him. 2 days later, an article about the lantern acquisition appeared in a regional business publication. My mother called 48 hours after that. I almost did not answer. Then I remembered Grandma's note. Jocelyn? Her voice was soft. Yes. Sweetheart. I actually looked at the phone. Don't call me that. Pause. I suppose I deserve that. What do you want? I heard about Lantern. Your father and I are incredibly proud. I closed my eyes. You weren't proud when I graduated. I handled that badly. You called it a catch-up ceremony. People say ugly things when families are strained. You were at brunch. Another pause. We cannot change the past. Then why are you calling? She said Grandma's death had made her reflect. She wanted us together for Thanksgiving. Avery was getting married the following spring. Dad's health had been stressful. Heart and Home had experienced a difficult year. Life is short, Mom said. We should stop acting like strangers. We are strangers. Only because you've insisted on it. There she was. The softness had lasted almost 3 minutes. I said no and hung up. Then I opened Instagram. My mother had already posted an old photograph of me and Avery as children. Our beautiful girls. So proud of the women they've become. Family love survives every season. Hundreds of people liked it. Several congratulated her on my business success. One wrote, "You must be bursting with pride after everything you did to raise such a brilliant daughter." Mom replied with a heart. I stared at that heart until my hand shook. She had not raised me. Grandma had. 3 days later, Avery texted from a number I did not know. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. Mom says you may come Thanksgiving. I hope you do. Also, I'm sorry about graduation. I should have come. It was the first time anyone in that house had apologized without adding a reason. I replied, "Did you know Mom told me not to contact you because I would ruin your engagement?" Avery took almost 10 minutes. No. Then, "She told me you were angry. I got engaged first and didn't want to come." That was the moment I understood reconnecting with Avery might matter even if nothing else did. We exchanged several messages. She told me Heart and Home had struggled after a major showroom renovation. Dad had taken loans. The house had been refinanced. Her wedding budget had also grown far beyond what she and Mason originally planned, because Mom wanted the wedding to function as a family comeback. Then Avery said something that made me laugh without humor. Mom keeps saying after the acquisition you might want to invest in the family business, and that would solve everything. There it was. The healing had a number attached. I agreed to Thanksgiving. Mom reacted as if she had won something. She sent seating plans. She asked for a recent photograph. For the family wall, she suggested I stay in my old room. I reminded her there was no old room. She wrote, "We can make something work." The week before Thanksgiving, Avery called me. "I think you should see this before you come." She forwarded a wedding planning email Mom had accidentally copied her on. It listed expected funding sources. Beside family contribution Jocelyn was $85,000. Another line read, Heart and Home Stabilization, Jocelyn Investment Target, $300K minimum. I called Avery immediately. Did I agree to either of those? No. Does Mom know you sent this? No. Why did you? She was quiet. Because I think maybe everyone has been telling me who you are without letting me know you. That sentence was enough. Thanksgiving at my parents' house looked exactly like every photograph of my childhood. Polished silver, fresh flowers, candles, Mom in a cream sweater. Dad carving turkey like routine could substitute for truth. Avery sat across from me beside Mason. She looked nervous. Dad looked older, his hair completely gray, shoulders smaller. When I arrived, he hugged me. I did not hug back immediately. Then I did, because grief and anger can exist in the same body without canceling each other. Dinner remained polite for almost 40 minutes. Mom asked about my work. Dad asked whether Raleigh still felt like home. Avery told me about the wedding venue. I deliberately did not mention money. Eventually, Mom did. Since we are all together, I think we should talk practically about the future. Avery looked down. Mason reached for her hand. Dad closed his eyes for half a second. Mom continued. Heart and Home had temporary cash flow problems. The house carried more debt than expected. Avery's wedding deposits were approaching deadlines. This family has assets, she said. And now, fortunately, we have a daughter in a position to help protect what generations built. I stared at her. Generations? The business, the house, your grandmother's memory, everything. Grandma Ruth had nothing to do with Heart and Home. She believed in family. She believed in showing up. Mom's face tightened. I am trying to have an adult conversation. Then use adult words, Dad said quietly. Jocelyn. I looked at him. Not yet, Mom continued anyway. She wanted me to invest $300,000 into the business as a silent partner and cover the remaining wedding costs as my gift to Avery. In return, Heart and Home would add my story to its brand campaign about family resilience. I actually laughed. You want to use my childhood in your marketing? Not your childhood, your success. Same difference to you, apparently. Why are you determined to make this ugly? There was the family question. Why was the person naming the ugliness always blamed for creating it? I reached into my bag and placed the printed wedding email on the table. Avery looked at her mother. Dad stared at the numbers. You already spent my money in your head, I said. Mom's cheeks reddened. Those were planning estimates. You wrote minimum, because we thought you might finally want to participate in this family. The room went quiet. There it is, I said. Say that again. I said, no, the part where belonging has a contribution requirement. That is not what I meant. It is exactly what you meant. Dad said, Jocelyn, nobody is making your relationship conditional on money. I turned to him. Good. Then tell me why I was sent to Grandma. He froze. Mom's expression changed instantly. Avery looked between them. What does that have to do with this? Mom asked. Everything. You were having behavioral problems. At 8? You were intense. Avery frowned. Mom? She was. Jocelyn remembers everything through this wounded little lens because Ruth encouraged it. I reached into my bag again and placed 3 copies of Grandma's letters on the table. Dad recognized his handwriting before touching them. His face collapsed. Mom whispered, Where did you get those? Grandma kept them. Avery picked up the first page. What is Daniel? No one answered. Dad? Graham looked at me. For 25 years I had imagined this moment as rage. Instead, I felt tired. Grandma asked me not to punish Avery with the truth, I said. I'm not going to tell her for you. She said you should. Avery looked at him. Tell me what? Dad put down his fork. His hands were shaking. Mom said, Graham, don't. Something changed in him at that command. Maybe age. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe the fact that Grandma was dead and no longer available to carry his guilt. Avery, he said, Daniel Wren is your biological father. Her face emptied. What? Mason whispered her name. Dad continued, voice breaking. Your mother and Daniel had a relationship. I found out before you were born. Avery looked at Mom. Is that true? Mom's eyes filled. It is more complicated than yes or no. Mom said nothing. Dad answered for her. Yes. Avery leaned back from the table as if distance could change the sentence. You're not my father? Dad's face broke completely. I am your father. Biologically. No. She started crying. You knew? From before you were born, my entire life? Yes. And Jocelyn? Dad looked at me. Jocelyn overheard an argument when she was 8. She asked about Daniel. Your mother panicked. Mom stood. I did not panic. Celeste, do not sit there and make me the villain when you agreed. I watched the old pattern begin in real time. Dad took the blame she threw at him. I did agree. Avery stared at both of them. Agree to what? I answered because this part was mine. Sending me to Grandma, Mom snapped. It was supposed to be temporary. The letters say otherwise. Avery read further. Her hands began shaking. She reached the line about my face, feeling like accusation. Mom. Celeste looked away. I was under enormous pressure, Avery whispered. You sent her away because she looked like Dad? No. It literally says that. Your grandmother hated me. Grandma raised her. Because Jocelyn preferred her. I laughed once. I was 8. Dad covered his face. Avery turned on him. And you let her? He dropped his hands. Yes. Why? Because I was trying to keep the marriage together. So you protected the marriage by getting rid of your daughter? Dad began crying. Yes. The simplicity of the answer hurt more than defense would have. I looked at him and realized this was what Grandma wanted me to hear. Not an excuse, but the truth in his voice. Avery stood abruptly and walked toward the living room. Mason followed but stopped when she raised a hand. I need 1 minute where nobody follows me. He stayed. Mom looked at me with hatred I had not seen since childhood. Are you happy? No. You came here to destroy her wedding. You budgeted my money before inviting me. This is not about money anymore. It was when dinner started. Your grandmother had no right to keep those letters. They were written to her. Private family matters. I was the family matter. She slapped the table with her palm. You have always needed to be the injured one. There it was. The reason apologies never came. My pain was not information to my mother. It was competition. If I had been harmed, someone had harmed me. She could not tolerate what that implied about her. I did not come to punish you, I said. I came because you asked for $300,000 and called it reconciliation. We are your parents. You stopped parenting me at 8. We provided for you. Grandma provided for me. We sent money. She sent love. Mom stood silent. Dad looked at me. She's right. Mom turned toward him. Excuse me? Jocelyn is right. Do not do this now because you feel guilty. I have felt guilty for 25 years. Then maybe you should have done something useful with it. Avery returned from the living room. Her face was pale but controlled. I want to know one thing. Mom wiped her eyes. Anything. Did you ever love Jocelyn less because she was Dad's? The question stunned everyone. Mom stared at Avery. That is not fair. Did you? I loved both of you. Then why did she have to leave and I got to stay? Because your sister was difficult with me. She was 8. Mom's jaw tightened. Avery's voice broke. Did you keep me because I was Daniel's? You were my baby. So was she. Silence. Avery sat down slowly. Oh my God. She looked at me. I didn't know. I know. I swear. I know. She cried harder. I thought you hated us. I thought you were happy I was gone. Mom told me you chose Grandma. I looked at Celeste. Of course she did. Mom stood up. I will not sit here while everyone rewrites my entire life based on letters from a woman who despised me. She walked toward the kitchen. Nobody stopped her. That was new. Dad remained at the table. Jocelyn, he said, I am sorry. I looked at him. For what? He understood the question. For letting you leave. For every year after that when I told myself bringing you back would cause too much conflict. For your graduation. I wanted to go. Celeste said if I went, Avery's engagement would become about you, and I chose the easier day. Avery shut her eyes. Dad continued. I have spent my whole life choosing whatever avoided the immediate fight and calling it keeping the family together. It did not keep the family together. I know. It kept you comfortable. He nodded. Yes, that was the closest thing to accountability I had ever received from him. I did not forgive him at the table. Forgiveness is not a reflex you perform to reward someone for finally telling the truth. I said, thank you for saying it. Then he asked whether I would still help with Heart and Home. I almost laughed. But his face told me he was not manipulating me. He was still simply incapable of separating emotional repair from practical crisis. No. Okay. I'm also not paying for Avery's wedding. Avery spoke before anyone else could. Good. We looked at her. She wiped her face. I mean it. I don't want $1 tied to this night. Avery, Dad began. No. Mason and I can have a smaller wedding. Mason nodded. Much smaller. Avery gave a broken laugh. Probably healthier. Then she looked at me. Would you come? The question hurt in a way I was not prepared for. If you still want me there after tonight. I want you there because of tonight. Mom returned from the kitchen just in time to hear that. Her expression went hard. So now the two of you are bonding over humiliating me. Avery stood. Mom, stop. I am your mother. And he is my father. She pointed toward Graham. Apparently in every way except DNA. You do not get to turn that into something he did to you. Celeste stared at her. I protected you. From what? From scandal. From confusion. By lying to me my whole life? You had a happy childhood. Avery's face changed. And Jocelyn? Mom had no answer. Exactly. Thanksgiving ended without dessert. Avery and Mason left for a hotel, instead of sleeping in the guest room. Dad stayed sitting at the table, while Mom disappeared upstairs. I gathered Grandma's letters. Before I left, Dad asked whether he could contact me. Not right now. Someday? Maybe. I understand. Do you? He looked at the stairs. I'm starting to. I drove back to Raleigh the next morning, with no dramatic sense of victory. I had spent 25 years imagining what it would feel like if my parents finally admitted the truth. I thought it would make the little girl inside me feel chosen retroactively. It did not. Nothing can travel backward and attend a school play, repaint a missing bedroom, or fill an empty graduation seat. Truth changes the future. It does not rewrite attendance records. The first real change came through Avery. She called 3 days later and asked whether we could meet somewhere neutral. We chose a coffee shop halfway between Richmond and Raleigh. She brought no parents, no wedding folder, no requests. For 2 hours we compared childhoods. She told me Mom had framed my absence as rejection. She said Grandma spoiled you and eventually you refused to come home. I begged to come home the first 2 years. Avery cried. She told me she had envied me sometimes because Grandma seemed cool and because I was allowed to escape the family pressure. I told her I had envied every Christmas photograph she appeared in. We both laughed at how efficiently 2 children had been taught to misunderstand each other. She apologized for graduation. I knew it was the same day. Mom told me contacting you would create drama. I let myself believe that because I wanted my engagement to be uncomplicated. Thank you for saying that. I was selfish. You were 26 and had been trained by the same people. That doesn't make it nothing. Another clean apology. I began trusting her because she did not try to use understanding to erase responsibility. Avery and Mason canceled the expensive wedding venue. They married 4 months later at a vineyard outside Charlottesville with 46 guests. Mom was invited but did not attend because Avery refused to let her give a speech or control photographs. Dad came alone. I attended. There was no staged sister reunion on social media. Avery posted one picture of the two of us laughing while fixing her veil and wrote, "Some relationships deserve a second beginning." Mom later posted that she had been excluded from her own daughter's wedding. Avery did not respond, neither did I. Heart and Home closed the following year. Not because I refused to save it. Because it had been struggling for years and my parents had postponed necessary changes while maintaining appearances. Dad sold the Richmond house, paid debts, and moved into a modest condo. Mom moved separately to an apartment near her sister after they separated. Their marriage did not survive the truth once the daughters stopped carrying it. Dad and I now speak occasionally, not every Sunday, not even every month. He wrote me a long letter after selling the house. One sentence mattered. I confused avoiding your mother's anger with protecting my family, and every time I chose peace in the room, I created damage somewhere you had to live with alone. I keep that letter. I do not keep it because it excuses him. I keep it because accountability deserves to be remembered too. Mom and I do not have a relationship. She sent several messages after Heart and Home closed, saying I had abandoned her when she needed me most. I answered once. Being successful did not make me responsible for repairing the life you excluded me from. She replied that Grandma had poisoned me. I blocked the number. That boundary is still in place. I used part of the acquisition money to renovate Grandma Ruth's house instead of selling it. The blue bedroom is still upstairs, though the paint is lighter now. I turned the detached garage into a small studio where I work when I need quiet. A local nonprofit uses the guest room several weekends a year for young adults aging out of foster care who are visiting colleges or interviewing for jobs in the area. I do not run a foundation with my name on it. I do not need another institution to prove the story meant something. Sometimes meaning is just making one safe room available because someone once made one available to you. The fountain pen Grandma gave me at graduation sits on my desk. Finished is still engraved on the side. For years I thought she meant finished with school. Then I thought she meant finished waiting for my parents. Now I think she meant something larger. Finished believing that people who failed to love me correctly were qualified to explain my value. That is what changed after Thanksgiving. Not my bank balance, not the family secret, not watching my mother lose control of the story. I finally stopped confusing being invited back with belonging. When my parents called after the acquisition, part of the old child in me still heard. They want you now. That feeling was powerful. It almost made $300,000 sound like admission to a room I had spent my whole life outside. But belonging that appears only after you become useful is not belonging. It is recruitment. Love that arrives after a newspaper article is not automatically fake, but it has to survive the answer no. My mother's did not. My father's barely began learning how. Avery's did. That difference matters. I also learned something uncomfortable about favoritism. The golden child does not always understand the system any better than the excluded child. Avery benefited enormously from our mother's choices. She received the home, attention, celebrations, and protection I did not. I will never pretend those things were equal. But she also spent 30 years inside a false identity created to protect adults. The moment she stopped defending the lie, she lost her special position too. Mom's affection became conditional. The second Avery refused to participate. Watching that helped me understand something Grandma had known all along. Favoritism is not proof that one child is more lovable. Often it is simply evidence that one child is performing a role the parent needs more. I was the difficult daughter because someone had to carry the family discomfort. Avery was the perfect daughter because someone had to prove the family was perfect. Neither role was a whole person. We are learning that now. Last Thanksgiving, Avery and Mason came to Grandma's house. Dad came for dessert after asking first. There were no place cards, no family photographer, no business proposal. Avery burned the rolls. Mason brought grocery store pie because nobody trusted us with dessert. Dad stood in Grandma's kitchen looking at photographs he had avoided for years. Before leaving, he touched the old graduation picture on the refrigerator. Grandma beside me in her blue suit, both of us crying. "I should have been there," he said. "Yes." I did not tell him it was okay. It was not. He nodded. "I know." Then he left. Healing can be that small. One truthful sentence with no request for absolution attached. The empty seat at my graduation used to feel like proof that I had failed to become important enough. Now I understand the seat was empty because two adults chose convenience over courage. That choice said everything about them and nothing about the woman crossing the stage. I finished the degree. I built Lantern. I survived Grandma's death. I learned to know my sister instead of competing with the version of her our mother created. I learned to accept an apology from my father without returning him to the authority he once had. And I learned that cutting contact with my mother did not make me cruel. Sometimes the most mature thing you can do with a toxic relationship is stop submitting new evidence in the hope the other person will finally agree you were hurt. They may never agree. You can leave anyway. Self-worth is not convincing the people who rejected you that they miscalculated. It is reaching the point where their calculation no longer determines your next move. I used to fantasize about success making my family regret losing me. Then success arrived and taught me something far less cinematic. Their regret did not heal me. Their need did not validate me. Their sudden invitations did not make me more lovable than I had been in Grandma's little blue bedroom at 8 years old. I had always been worth showing up for. They simply did not. That is their history to carry now, not mine. So tell me honestly, if the parents who sent you away as a child, skipped your graduation, and only came back after you became wealthy, asked you to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars to save the family business, then you discovered they had hidden the real reason for excluding you for 25 years, would any genuine apology ever be enough to rebuild that relationship? Or would you take the truth, set the boundary, and leave that family behind for good?